Chapter 8. Tents for Wilderness Campers. I spent all my boyhood summers in the North Woods. There, the almost universal camp was the log lean-to with its sloping and reflecting roof and its open front, before which a cheerfully big campfire was kindled. The last thing at night, heavy logs were heaped on this. By the time the forest was becoming silhouetted against the lemonish smudge of an eastern skyline, often ghostly with streamers of early morning mist from lake and rivers, these snapping guardians against the cold had usually shaken apart into hot coals ideal for cooking. This type of permanent lean-to, still to be seen in our forests, was a direct development evolving from the open-faced camp that our early frontiersmen used when away from their backwoods cabins. From those early bivouacs have come to our most agreeable and functional modern tents. The Spanish-American War instilled in me a strong desire for Army life. When I was mustered out of the service in the spring of 1900, a second lieutenant in the 1st Pennsylvania Infantry with $500 in my pocket, I learned there would be no opportunity for examinations for the entrance into the Army for a year, so I determined to have a grand hunting trip in the meantime. I'd been dreaming of such a hunt ever since getting my first rifle in 1891, a .22 Remington rolling block, with which the following year I was fortunate enough to win my first rifle match for guides in the Adirondacks and to shoot my first deer unaided and alone. So I gathered a small outfit. June found me in British Columbia at the southern terminus of the Telegraph Trail to Alaska. There I bought 3 horses, rigging and grub, and started toward the top of the continent, not to return for 9 glorious months. Following the lessons derived from my boyhood experiences, the only shelter I had was a tarpaulin, 10 feet long and 8 feet wide. This was made of light and closely woven cotton. I had sewed it myself, as a matter of fact, and had waterproofed it with paraffin. Tarpaulin shelter. The 5th day on the trail, I ran into Bones Andrews, an old mountain man. We figured we might as well string along together for a few days. This association developed into a close friendship, and we agreed on a partnership to hunt and prospect. Bones had a dilapidated wall tent 8 feet square. Not only was it full of holes, but it was heavy and difficult to erect. It wasn't long before we came to prefer my tarp. Easily pitched as a lean-to, Bones finally traded his tent to some Chillicothe Indians for a groundhog, or what is also known thereabouts as a marmot or whistler robe. From then on, all through the warm summer and fall, when birches and poplars turned an incredible yellow and the sometimes blusterous winter, we used my tarp. We put it up at an angle of about 45 degrees. We filled in with boughs or small spruce trees at the ends whenever the weather was cold or stormy. Firewood was plentiful everywhere, just as it still is in that country, and we had a comfortable and cheerful camp even when temperatures dropped so low that Bones remarked that what we needed was a 3-foot thermometer with 0 at the top. We cooked, ate, worked, and just loafed in perfect ease. Teepee. In the years that followed, I experimented extensively with shelter and camp equipment, partly because as a result of such assignments as Director of Research and Development at the Springfield Armory, Commanding Officer at Frankfurt Arsenal, and Ordnance Representative on the Infantry Board, experimentation in achieving greater perfection in performance became pretty much second nature with me. On 2 long trips to the Northwest, we used an Indian teepee, which is an exceptionally pleasant and functional conical tent. The nomads of the entire northern world have used it, or slight modifications of it, for many centuries. It was often their only shelter and home, and in it they raised families and grew to an old age. The teepee is an all-weather shelter, used closed with a little wood fire in the center, which serves for cooking and heat as well as for light. It will take you through even an Arctic blizzard in perfect comfort. The 2 major drawbacks of a teepee are its weight and the difficulty of finding and cutting 11 or more long, straight poles. In those early days, we used the teepee in mountain country that was fragrant with lodgepole pines. At innumerable places suitable for camp, we'd find quantities of teepee poles cut and stacked up against the trees. The Indians who originally hunted this range had left them there. On a trip through the same area some years later, I found these lodge poles all gone, burned up by modern campers in their confounded tin stoves. Where my present writing partner lives, despite the Great Peace River in the Canadian Rockies, one still comes across quantities of such poles, however, mostly along old trails that are now nearly forgotten. The teepee day is impractical except as a permanent camp. One-man tents. When a fellow camps by himself and does all his own work, there are certain features that he appreciates in a shelter. He wants a tent that is neither ponderous nor bulky. He likes something that is simple to erect. The tent, furthermore, should be ruggedly capable of sheltering him from rain and snow. It should warm up quickly and easily from a wood fire in front, no matter what the direction of the wind. It should be so arranged that moisture beating by the open front will not reach the bedding. The immediate front of such a tent should provide a comfortable place in which to cook, repair equipment, oil rods and firearms, skin animals, and just plain lounge. Cooking in any weather short of a torrential downpour should be possible without getting wet. There should be convenient places to store the various classes of duffel, to dry clothing, and to hang a mosquito bar if desirable. Such a tent should be laid out so that the camper will sleep lengthwise across the front, parallel to a long fire. His vital organs will thus be nearest the heart of the vitalizing heat. It will also be easy for him to get in and out of the sleeping bag. He will be able to see out of the tent while in bed and hear also, and the genial warmth and light of the campfire will be at hand to be enjoyed and regulated if needed be until sleep drops its nightly curtain. Sleeping in very cold weather. In very cold weather, a fire will not warm the back interior of any tent, but it does always warm a tent of this sort for at least 4 feet back from the front. The habit among almost a religion among some of sleeping with the feet toward the opening and the fire is all wrong. This places the head and shoulders inconveniently back in a dark and poorly ventilated portion, makes it unnecessarily difficult to get in and out of bed, and pens one in needlessly. When we've been forced because of unexpected crowding to bunch up in a tent, as a matter of fact, both of us, even during our greener years, automatically chose to sleep with head and shoulders toward embers and outdoors. During more than one night, we've been aroused by other occupants following suit. It has often been said that if the feet are warm, the entire body will be comfortable. As a matter of fact, it is more important to have the vital organs near the center of the body warm, and if there are, the whole body will indeed be at ease, provided you don't turn in with wet socks. With all these factors in mind, and after a lot of experience and experiment, I thought out what I called a hunter's lean-to tent. This I had made up by one of our leading tent makers, who, incidentally, has been marketing it since as the Whelen lean-to. I have used it in the north for 20 years, and it is the best design I have ever found. 2 old sourdough friends, J. Williams and Hosea Sarber, now both across the Great Divide, likewise used it exclusively in Alaska for many moons and swore by it. The Whelen lean-to tent. This design would not be satisfactory for a group of sportsmen with guides and cooks. For such a party, I know of nothing that will equal a big tarp, 12 by 14 feet or larger, pitched as a lean-to, but for 1 or 2 hunters, fishermen, or woods loafers who do their own work, including cooking, and who travel by pack train or canoe, shifting camp often, I know of no shelter so convenient and so comfortable in any climate where firewood is plentiful, with the single exception of tropical mosquito country. This tent in principle is somewhat like the Baker tent. It too has a steeply sloping shed roof. The side walls, instead of being perpendicular, splay outward and forward at the bottom. Their angle is such that the front end of each of those walls stakes down about 2 feet outward and 2 feet forward of where a perpendicular would reach the ground if dropped from the ends of the 6-foot tape ridge. Thus the slope at such an angle that they will reflect heat and light into the tent. They extend forward so as to keep winds and cold breezes from blowing around in front and making the little living sanctuary there chilly. With the walls spreading out in this way, a storage space is created at the head of the sleeping bag for personal effects, while another is provided at the foot for cooking utensils and grub. The fact that there is no wall at the back of the roof simplifies both construction and pitching. It it reduces cost. The low area beneath the roof at the rear can be utilized for stowing duffel not in use. Loops are attached at the ridge tape through which the ridge pole is thrust. On the underside of the 6-foot tape ridge are 2 other loops which will support a short pole on which clothing may be hung either to be out of the way or to be dry. Or too dry. A 30-inch wide awning is sewed to the ridge. This can either be thrown back over the ridge pole or extended out to prolong the roof. In the case of storm, for example, the awning is stretched out forward and downward from the ridge so that it shelters the ground in front, keeps moisture from driving into the tent, and creates a dry space in which to sit and cook over the fire. To extend the awning in this fashion, you don't have to use always bothersome guy ropes. You simply cut a pair of poles about 6 feet long and sharpen both ends. Stick one end of each in the large grommet at each outer corner of the awning. Plant the other ends at the foot and at the head of the sleeping bag. The weight of these will keep the awning extended and taut without any guy lines being in the way to snag you or trip you. The front edge of the awning will then be about 4 feet above the ground, where heat and light from the fire can still come in under it. Pitching the Whelen lean-to. To pitch this tent, cut a ridge pole about 10 feet long. Thread this through the loops at the ridge tape. Support the pole by trees or sheer poles, as suggested by the illustrations, about 6 feet above the ground. Then stake down the back and sides, and your tent is ready for occupancy. The tent shown is 1-man size. It will comfortably accommodate 2 campers sleeping side by side parallel to the front. The man whose turn it is to build the fire in the morning snoozes on the outside. He can then lean out of his bag, place shavings and split wood in the fireplace, touch a match to them, and get up 10 minutes later in a reflected warmth. Made of Aberlite or green waterproof Egyptian cotton, running approximately 6 ounces per square yard, the Whelen lean-to tent weighs about 7 pounds. It is also available in an extra light, long stapled cotton weighing 5 pounds. It is 7 feet deep, 6 feet wide at the rear, and about 10 feet wide in front. This front can become the coziest and warmest living room, easily available in the furthest places. The sides somehow do much to keep smoke from blowing into the tent, and in fact eradicate this nuisance entirely if you have a tier of backlogs a foot high behind the campfire. It is not adapted to temperatures of 20 degrees below zero and colder, for it would then take too many hours of axe work to get in the firewood necessary for heat and for cooking. When such frigidity endures for any considerable time, you need a closed tent with a stove. Besides an axe, you should also have either a buck saw or a Swede saw to cut the wood into short lengths necessary to feed the firebox. 1-man shelter. In cold weather, the solitary backpacker on a brief outing will not want to carry a bulky tent stove. He must depend, therefore, on the campfire to keep him snug and warm in the face of wintry blasts. The best plan is to build a blaze about as long as you yourself are in front of the open end of a lean-to tent. This fire may well be laid between 2 dry logs that have been placed about a foot apart. You will not doubt want to lie lengthwise beside this fire, of course. Even this small lean-to tent promotes cheerfulness, comfort, and enjoyable convenience. Not only do you profit to the fullest reasonable degree from the fire while asleep, but when you awake in the morning there is the sky to study for weather hints and the surrounding country to scan. When you are seated before the fire preparing your meals, you will have plenty of room for food and utensils on either side. As you recline after supper, you can bask in the hearty warmth of the campfire and see between the tongues of flame perhaps some of the magnificence reserved as special rewards for those who venture into distant and deserted places. For the simplest shelter, you need carry only a simple tarpaulin corresponding in shape and design to shelter cloth illustrated here. This will serve to protect your bed from rain, to act as a windbreak, and to reflect heat from your outdoor fire, so that it will add a minimum of bulk and weight to your pack. The tarpaulin should be made of one of the lighter waterproof cottons. You can, of course, waterproof the fabric yourself as described in the following chapter. The main section of the shelter cloth illustrated measures 6 feet high by 7 feet wide. The triangular ends form sidewalls when the shelter is erected. The side view drawing shows a biovac in place. Such a tent can be easily erected in a few minutes. I usually look for a tree to support one end of the ridgepole and use a couple of poles tied together as shears at the other end. The bow mattress for your sleeping bag can be spread between two logs, which at the same time will provide a deacon seat across the front of the tent. I usually cut a fair-sized log and stake it down at the back of the tent, tying the lower part of the rear wall to this rather than bother with stakes. Not only is this technique generally easier and quicker, but it makes a more substantial job as well as serving to keep out furtive drafts. In very cold weather, imitate the trapper and choose a cubbyhole as your campsite, a sheltered spot among thickly spreading spruce, or perhaps a tiny clearing in the center of a thick fir grove. The Forester Tent. If your problem is to cut weight or cost, the Forester Tent is a good solution. It is one of the best tents ever devised for a chronic woods loafer, particularly for one who wishes to live close to nature and who objects to spending any of his outdoor hours confined in a closed canvas cell. The Forester tent is the cheapest of all tents, either to buy or to make yourself. It is the easiest and quickest to pitch, considering its weight and bulk. It is the most comfortable in which to live and do your few camp chores. With the exception of the Whelen lean-to tent, it is the easiest to warm with a campfire in front. The one weak point of the Forester, at first glance anyways, is that if you try to mosquito-proof it, you ruin its inexpensiveness and its functional simplicity. In bug time, however, it is an easy matter to secure a mosquito bar for $1 or $2 and to hang or stake its net enclosure over your bed. The Forester tent is triangular in shape, the smallest practical dimensions for one man, or for two who do not mind a bit of crowding, is about 7 feet wide at the open front, 3 feet wide at the back, and 7 feet deep from front to rear. The peak of such a model should stand about 6 feet above the ground in the front, while the triangular rear wall will be about 3 feet high. With the entire tent open to the fire in front, the angles will be such that heat and light will be reflected throughout the sheltered area. The tent is usually pitched with 3 poles and 8 sticks cut at the campsite. The ridgepole should be long enough to extend from the peak and to pass down and out through the hole at the back of the wall at such a tilt that it will rest on the ground about 3 feet behind the tent. 2 shorter poles are arranged in front as squares and holding. The ridgepole at their apex run from the peak to the front corners. Prevailing wind. You pitch this tent with its back to the prevailing wind. If the wind shifts around to the front and it comes on rain or snow, however, the front of the tent and the more exposed parts of the bedding can get wet. This is why some tent makers sew a hood to the front of the shelter that can be stretched protectively out in case of storm. A poncho or any small piece of canvas can be used to close the top of the open front, too. In any event, the entire front should not be closed all the way down to the ground. If only the top part is shut, moisture will be kept out. It will still be possible at the same time to cook comfortably during a storm. Another advantage inherent with this particular type of tent is that one is so easy to handle that only a very few minutes will be required to strike and then erect it again with its back into a new wind direction. Made in this small size of almost any of the light waterproof tent fabrics, such a tent will not weigh more than 4 or 5 pounds. Experimental winter camp. My first experience with the Forester dates back to about 30 years ago when I was experimenting with various types of camp equipment. I took a Forester tent with light backpacking equipment and climbed up to the summit of the Alleghenies one January. There, by a little stream high up on a peak in a rather exposed spot, I pitched camp and lived for a week. The climate gave the tent a rugged test. I ran into rain, sleet, and snow. There was wind. Temperatures dropped way below freezing at night. At first, in the cold and gusty weather, I needed only a brisk fire 4 feet in front of the tent to afford me perfect comfort. When it began to blow and storm, I erected a pile of rocks in back of the fire as a reflector, and I heaped up a lot of brush at the sides. Thereafter, despite blizzard and severe cold, I remained perfectly reposed. These were unusually tough conditions, and never thereafter did I have to resort to closing in the front area in this way. Trips since then made under usual summer and fall conditions have shown that a moderate fire warms and lights this type of tent so that it becomes an extremely enjoyable and jolly abode. The sloping and the outward splaying of the sidewalls contribute a great deal to heating and illuminating this little shelter. The walls seem to serve these purposes much better than does the sloping roof of the conventional Baker form of lean-to tent. As a matter of fact, it was my experience with the walls of the Forester that led me to incorporate the same principle in my lean-to tent. On this winter test trip I just mentioned, I was also experimenting with bedding. I laid a browse mattress on the frozen ground and covered the spruce boughs with a light poncho. Then I spread my sleeping bag on top. This bag, also experimental, had an outside cover of unwaterproofed, unbleached muslin. Within this were 2 bags. The outer consisted of 3 pounds of wool batting quilted in light wool flannel. The inner was a 2.5-pound woolen blanket. The entire arrangement weighed 10 pounds. I slept in all my day clothes with the exception of moccasins and Mackinaw coat. The latter served for my pillow. On the frostiest and most tempestuous nights, I woke up 2 or 3 times with the shivers and had to pile out and rebuild the blaze. On still nights I slept soundly all the way through, although the campfire went out sometime during the small dark hours. Pattern for making Whelen lean-to tent. For 1 or 2 campers sleeping with their sides to the front, make a closely woven waterproof cotton about 5 to 7 ounces per square yard and cut and sew to the shape and dimensions shown, allowing 1 inch around the edges for hemming. A tape ridge with outside loops for ridgepole and 2 loops on underside for clothing pole. B. Loops or cords sewed to outside of roof in which to insert poles when necessary to take belly from roof in snow or heavy rain. C. Large grommets 1 inch in diameter in which to insert sharpened poles which keep awning extended to the front when desired. And D. Loops sewed inside at junction of roof and walls to hang mosquito bar from when needed. Pattern for making Forester tent. For 1 or 2 campers with beds arranged along side walls, make of closely woven waterproof cotton about 5 to 7 ounces per square yard and cut and sew to the shape and dimensions shown, allowing 1 inch all around the edge for hemming. Note how bottom of side set back 1 foot to make tent sit right on ground. To manage this, cut pattern from rectangular canvas as shown by dotted lines, then angle the front and back. The rear wall is cut off square at top, and when this is sewed to the main body of the tent at the rear, it leaves a hole at the top of the rear wall through which the ridge pole is struck. Total weight 4 to 5 pounds. The far north. Several years later, this same bag served me on a 2-month fall hunting trip in the northern Canadian Rockies, where occasional night temperatures dropped almost to 0. I slept in a teepee on a balsam mattress with 2 horse blankets spread between boughs and bag. No attempt was made to keep the fire up all night. I was perfectly snug, although on the coldest nights I would not have been so if it had not been for the gear underneath. This same little Forester tent has gone with me, too, on many of my trips into the far north. It has often been used there by my companions while I was sleeping in my lean-to tent. The 2 shelters pitched 10 feet apart, facing each other with a fire flickering between, make about the most comfortable camp imaginable. Most men are needlessly poor all of their lives because they think they must have such a house as their neighbors have. An old woodsman said more than a century ago, "Consider how slight a shelter is absolutely necessary."